The morning sun cast a golden glow over London as thousands of people gathered along the Mall, their faces filled with anticipation. It was the day of Trooping the Colour, one of the most spectacular royal events of the year. Families had arrived early, some camping overnight to secure the best viewing spots. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving small Union Jack flags, while tourists from around the world held their cameras ready, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Inside Kensington Palace, the Wales family was preparing for the grand occasion. Princess Charlotte stood in front of a tall mirror in her room, watching as her outfit was carefully adjusted. The young princess wore a beautiful white and navy dress that perfectly matched the formal tone of the day. Her hair had been styled elegantly, with a small bow adding a touch of childhood charm to her sophisticated appearance. Despite being only 9 years old, Charlotte carried herself with remarkable poise and grace. Her mother, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, moved through the palace with her characteristic elegance, though those who knew her well could detect something different about her that morning. Catherine had been through an incredibly challenging year, one that had tested her strength in ways the public could only imagine. Earlier in the year, she had faced a serious health scare that required her to step back from public duties. The diagnosis had come as a shock, not just to her family, but to millions around the world who admired her dedication and warmth. For months, Catherine had undergone treatment while trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for her children. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had been her constant source of strength during those difficult days. She had been remarkably open about her journey, sharing updates with the public in a way that was both honest and dignified. Her courage had inspired countless people facing their own health battles. Now, as Trooping the Colour approached, Catherine had made the decision to attend. It would be her first major public appearance since her diagnosis, and the significance was not lost on anyone. For the royal family, it was a moment of celebration and relief. For the British public, it was an opportunity to show their love and support. For a woman who had won their hearts through years of dedicated service, Charlotte understood more than most children her age. What her mother had been through? She had seen the worry in her father's eyes during those quiet evenings at home. She had noticed when her mother seemed tired, or when family plans had to change unexpectedly. The young princess had a remarkable emotional intelligence, something that had been evident since she was very small. She noticed things, remembered details, and had a way of understanding situations beyond her years. In the days leading up to Trooping the Colour, Charlotte had thought carefully about the event. She knew it was important to her mother, and she wanted to do something special. The princess had always shared a close bond with Catherine, spending hours together baking, gardening, and simply talking about everything from school to the books they were reading. Their relationship was built on genuine affection and mutual respect. Despite the formal nature of their public roles, Prince William watched his daughter that morning with a mixture of pride and emotion. He had seen how attentive Charlotte had been during Catherine's recovery, how she would quietly bring her mother a glass of water or ask if she needed anything. The prince knew his daughter had inherited her mother's compassion and thoughtfulness, qualities that would serve her well throughout her life. As the family prepared to leave for the ceremony, there was an air of both excitement and nervousness. Prince George, as the eldest, understood the weight of the occasion and appeared more serious than usual. Prince Louis, being the youngest, was full of energy and enthusiasm. Though his parents had given him several reminders about proper behavior during the long ceremony, Charlotte stood between her brothers, a calming presence who somehow managed to be both a child and remarkably mature at the same time. The cars arrived to take them to Buckingham Palace, where the formal procession would begin. As they traveled through London's streets, Catherine looked out at the crowds already gathering, and her heart filled with gratitude. She had missed this connection with the public during her time away. The people waving and smiling reminded her of why she had always felt such a strong sense of duty to her role. At Buckingham Palace, Ilavizia was bustling with preparation. Military personnel in their finest ceremonial uniforms stood at attention. Horses were being groomed to perfection, and palace staff moved efficiently to ensure every detail was perfect. The royal family gathered in one of the grand rooms before the procession began. King Charles greeted his grandchildren warmly, giving each of them a special moment of his attention. Queen Camilla complimented Charlotte on her dress. Making the young princess beam with pride, Catherine exchanged glances with William, a silent communication that spoke volumes about their shared relief and happiness at being able to participate in this tradition together. They had faced one of the most challenging periods of their marriage, and coming through it had only strengthened their bond. William's support had been unwavering, taking on additional responsibilities while ensuring their children felt secure and loved. The moment finally arrived when the procession was set to begin. The sound of military bands tuning their instruments drifted through the palace windows. Outside, the crowds had swelled to enormous numbers, with people pressed shoulder to shoulder along the entire route. News cameras from around the world were positioned to capture every moment of the historic ceremony. Charlotte took her place with her family, her small hand briefly touching her mother's arm in a gesture of connection. It was a tiny moment, barely noticeable, but it represented the deep bond between mother and daughter. The princess had been thinking about this day for weeks, planning something special in her heart. She wanted her mother to know how proud she was of her, how much she admired her strength, and how happy she was to have her there. The palace doors opened, and the magnificent spectacle of Trooping the Color began to unfold. The Wales family stepped forward into the bright sunshine, greeted by the roar of the crowd and the stirring music of the military bands. For Catherine, it was an emotional return. For Charlotte, it was the beginning of a day that would touch hearts around the world. The royal procession made its way through the palace grounds with precision and grandeur that only centuries of tradition could perfect. Catherine sat in the carriage with her 3 children, acknowledging the crowds with graceful waves and warm smiles. The response from the public was overwhelming. People weren't just cheering for royalty, passing by, but expressing genuine relief and joy at seeing the Princess of Wales looking healthy and radiant after her difficult months away from public life. Charlotte sat beside her mother, occasionally glancing up at Catherine's face to gauge how she was feeling. The young princess had developed this habit during her mother's recovery, learning to read the subtle signs of fatigue or discomfort. Today, however, she could see something different in her mother's expression. There was genuine happiness there, mixed with emotion that occasionally made Catherine's eyes glisten with unshed tears. The outpouring of love from the crowd was clearly touching her deeply. The carriage made its way down the Mall, that iconic stretch of road leading to Buckingham Palace. The avenue was lined with Union Jack flags fluttering in the gentle breeze. The crowd stretched as far as the eye could see. People of all ages had come to witness this moment. Elderly veterans stood proudly in their medals, remembering decades of similar ceremonies. Young families introduced their children to royal tradition. International visitors captured the spectacle on their phones. Knowing they were witnessing something truly special, Prince George sat opposite his mother and sister, maintaining the composed demeanor expected of a future king, though his eyes sparkled with excitement at the pageantry unfolding around them. Prince Louis, true to his spirited nature, waved enthusiastically at the crowd, sometimes making faces that caused ripples of laughter among those close enough to see. William rode separately on horseback in his military uniform, looking every inch the prince and future king, though his eyes frequently sought out his family in the carriage, particularly Catherine, as they approached Horse Guards Parade, where the main ceremony would take place. The military precision of the event became even more apparent. Over 1,400 officers and soldiers were participating, along with 200 horses and 400 musicians. The ceremony of Trooping the Color dated back to the 17th century, originally used to show soldiers the colors of their regiment so they could recognize them in battle. Now it served as the official celebration of the monarch's birthday. A tradition that drew millions of viewers worldwide. The carriages came to a stop, and the royal family took their positions to watch the ceremony. Charlotte stood near her mother, occasionally adjusting her dress or smoothing her hair. Small gestures that showed she was aware of the cameras and the importance of the occasion. Yet she never strayed far from Catherine's side. The bond between them was evident to anyone watching, a connection that went beyond formal royal relationships into genuine, maternal affection and filial devotion. The ceremony unfolded with breathtaking precision. The military bands played stirring marches while soldiers in their distinctive red tunics and bearskin hats marched in perfect formation. The color being trooped was carried with solemn dignity, representing the honor and history of the regiment. Horses moved in synchronized patterns that had been practiced for months. Every element came together to create a spectacle that was both a celebration of military excellence and a display of national pride. Catherine watched with genuine interest. Having always appreciated the dedication and discipline required to execute such a complex ceremony flawlessly, she had attended Trooping the Color many times since marrying into the royal family, but this year felt different. Every moment felt more precious, every sight more beautiful. Her absence from public life had given her a renewed appreciation for these traditions and the privilege of participating in them. Charlotte noticed when her mother's hand moved to briefly touch her necklace, a gesture Catherine often made when feeling emotional. The young princess shifted slightly closer, her shoulder gently brushing against her mother's arm. It was a small movement, easily missed by most observers, but it represented the protective instinct Charlotte had developed over the past months. She had seen her mother vulnerable. It had awakened something fierce and tender in her young heart. The military bands transitioned from one stirring march to another, their music carrying across the parade ground and beyond, reaching the thousands of spectators straining to see over the heads of those in front of them. The precision of the ceremony was mesmerizing. Soldiers who had trained for months executed each movement perfectly. Horses that had been carefully prepared remained calm despite the noise and crowds. Every detail had been considered. Every possible problem anticipated and prepared for. King Charles, in his ceremonial uniform, inspected the troops with the careful attention that characterized his approach to royal duty. As the monarch whose birthday was being celebrated, he was the central figure of the ceremony. Yet his frequent glances toward his family revealed his personal joy at having Catherine present for this moment. The king had been deeply worried during his daughter-in-law's health crisis, and her return to public duties meant more to the family than the public could fully understand. As the ceremony progressed through its various stages, the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the parade ground. Some of the younger spectators began to fidget, their patience tested by the length of the formal proceedings. But Charlotte remained remarkably still and focused, her attention divided between the ceremony and her mother. She was aware that photographers were capturing their images, that millions of people would see these photographs in newspapers and online. The princess knew how important it was to present the right image, but her concern for her mother went beyond. Public relations. During a particularly moving moment, when the national anthem played and flags were raised, Charlotte watched a tear slip down Catherine's cheek. The Princess of Wales quickly wiped it away, hoping no one had noticed, but Charlotte had seen. The young princess felt her own throat tighten with emotion. She understood, perhaps better than most children her age could, that her mother's tears weren't from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling of being back doing what she loved. Surrounded by support and affection from a grateful nation, the ceremony continued with the march past, where the troops paraded before the king and the royal family, the sound of hundreds of boots hitting the ground in perfect unison, the sight of colors flying proudly, and the music of the military bands combined to create an experience that stirred something deep in the hearts of all who witnessed it. This was history and tradition made visible, a connection to centuries of national identity and pride. As the ceremony at Horse Guards Parade concluded, the royal family prepared for the next phase of Trooping the Color, the carriage procession back to Buckingham Palace. This journey would take them once again down the Mall, where even more spectators had gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royals as they passed. The crowd had grown significantly, with people packed tightly along every available space. Their faces turned expectantly toward the approaching procession. Charlotte climbed back into the carriage with her mother and brothers, settling into her seat with practiced ease. The young princess had participated in enough royal events to know the routine, but each one still held a sense of occasion for her. As the carriage began to move, she noticed how the crowd's cheers seemed to intensify when they spotted Catherine. People weren't just showing respect for a princess, but expressing genuine love for a woman they'd come to admire deeply over the years. Signs and banners dotted the crowd, many of them bearing messages of support and welcome for Catherine. "We missed you," read one sign held by an elderly woman whose own battle with illness made her feel a particular kinship with the Princess of Wales. "Welcome back, Catherine," proclaimed another, held high by a young girl who had dressed up in her finest outfit for the occasion. These personal messages of affection moved Catherine deeply, and she made an effort to acknowledge as many as she could, her waves and smiles carrying genuine warmth. The carriage ride provided a brief respite from the formality of the ceremony. Inside, away from the immediate scrutiny of the crowd, Catherine could share quiet words with her children. She complimented George on his excellent behavior and laughed softly at Louis's excited chatter about the horses and soldiers. When she turned to Charlotte, their eyes met in a moment of deep understanding. Mother and daughter shared a smile that spoke of their special connection, forged through both happy times and challenging ones Charlotte had been thinking about. What she wanted to do when they reached the palace balcony. The balcony appearance was always the highlight of Trooping the Color. The moment when the royal family gathered to watch the RAF fly past and wave to the massive crowd gathered in front of Buckingham Palace. It was a moment of spectacle and tradition, broadcast around the world and photographed from every conceivable angle. The young princess knew this would be the perfect time for her gesture, the moment when it would mean the most to her mother. The carriage passed through Admiralty Arch, that majestic gateway that marked the transition from the Mall to the area around Buckingham Palace. The crowds here were even denser, if that was possible, with people who had been waiting for hours in hopes of securing a spot close to the palace. The atmosphere was electric with excitement and anticipation. Camera crews from international news networks had set up their equipment to capture the balcony appearance, knowing that this year's event held special significance as they approached the palace. Charlotte could see the forecourt already filled with people, their faces upturned toward the building, waiting for the royal family to emerge onto the famous balcony. The palace itself looked magnificent in the sunshine, its Portland stone facade gleaming white, the royal standard flying proudly to indicate the monarch's presence. Palace guards stood at attention, their red uniforms and bearskin hats adding to the ceremonial grandeur of the scene. The carriage entered the palace grounds, and the family was temporarily shielded from public view. This brief transition time allowed them to prepare for the balcony appearance. Palace staff were ready to assist with any last-minute adjustments to clothing or hair. There was a sense of organized efficiency as various members of the royal family gathered, coordinating who would stand where on the balcony. These details mattered for photographs and for ensuring that everyone could be seen by the crowd. William rejoined his family. Having dismounted from his horse and changed quickly, he approached Catherine, placing a supportive hand on her back and exchanging a few private words. Their relationship had always been strong, but the challenges of recent months had deepened their bond even further. William had been Catherine's rock, managing family responsibilities while supporting her through treatment, always maintaining the balance between his public duties and his private role as a husband and father. Charlotte watched her parents interact, noting the tender way they looked at each other. She had grown up seeing their affection and partnership, understanding from a young age that despite the formality of their public roles, they were a family built on love. This understanding had shaped her own approach to royal life, teaching her that it was possible to fulfill duty while maintaining genuine, human connections. The time came to move toward the balcony doors. The royal family assembled in order, with protocol dictating the precise arrangement. King Charles and Queen Camilla would be central, with other family members positioned according to their place in the line of succession and their roles within the royal family. Catherine, William, and their children would naturally be prominent in the display, reflecting their importance to the monarchy's future. Charlotte made sure she was positioned next to her mother. This wasn't difficult to arrange, as the children typically stood with their parents, but the young princess was intentional about it. She wanted to be right there, close enough to do what she had been planning. Her heart beat a little faster with anticipation. Not from nervousness, but from the excitement of doing something she knew would mean a lot to her mother. The doors to the balcony opened, and the sound of the crowd's roar washed over them like a wave. It was an incredible sound, the voices of thousands upon thousands of people united in celebration and welcome. The royal family stepped out onto the balcony, and the volume of the cheering somehow increased even more. Cameras flashed from every direction, creating a constellation of light that rivaled the sunshine. Catherine walked out onto the balcony with her family, and the crowd's response to her appearance was extraordinary. The cheering took on a different quality, warmer and more emotional. People were genuinely moved to see her there, looking radiant and healthy. Some in the crowd wiped away tears of their own, feeling a personal connection to her journey. The outpouring of affection was palpable, crossing the distance between the palace, balcony, and the thousands of people pressed against the gates, and spread throughout the surrounding area. The royal family took their positions along the balcony railing. George stood tall, conscious of his future role. Louis was barely able to contain his excitement, bouncing slightly on his toes and waving vigorously at the crowd. Charlotte stood beside Catherine, close enough that their arms touched. The young princess looked out at the sea of faces, the flags waving. The sheer magnitude of people who had come to celebrate this moment. William stood on Catherine's other side, and together they presented the image of a strong, united family. But it was more than just image. The genuineness of their bond was evident in every glance, every small gesture. They were performing their royal duty, yes, but they were also a family sharing an important moment together. Grateful to all be there after a period when Catherine's presence had been uncertain. The royal family stood on the balcony, waving to the enormous crowd gathered below. The scene was magnificent from their elevated position, offering a view of the sea of people that stretched far beyond the palace gates, filling the mall and spilling into the surrounding areas. The Union Jack flags created waves of red, white, and blue as people waved them enthusiastically. The energy from the crowd was infectious, a celebration not just of tradition, but of this particular moment with this particular family. Charlotte looked up at her mother, watching as Catherine smiled and waved to the crowd. The princess could see the emotion in her mother's eyes, the way she occasionally blinked rapidly, as if holding back tears. The weight of the public's love and support was clearly touching Catherine deeply. After months of privacy and recovery, facing such an overwhelming display of affection was both wonderful and emotionally overwhelming. The young princess had been observing her mother's expressions throughout the day, reading the subtle signs that others might miss. She could tell when Catherine was genuinely happy versus when she was tired but maintaining her composure. She noticed when her mother's smile reached her eyes and when it was more of a professional courtesy. Right now, Charlotte could see that her mother was experiencing something profound, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and pure joy at being able to participate in this cherished tradition. The crowd continued their enthusiastic cheering, with occasional chants of support rising above the general noise. Some people called out Catherine's name, while others simply expressed their happiness at seeing her. The personal nature of these calls made the moment feel less like a formal ceremony and more like a heartfelt reunion between Catherine and the public who had followed her journey with such concern and care. King Charles stood at the center of the balcony, acknowledging the crowd with regal waves. Queen Camilla beside him smiled warmly at the gathered masses. But even the king occasionally glanced toward his son's family, grandfather's pride and relief evident in his expression. The presence of all three of William and Catherine's children on the balcony, with Catherine looking radiant, represented more than just a photo opportunity. It symbolized the continuity and future of the monarchy, the next generation standing ready to serve. Prince Louis, true to form, provided moments of levity with his animated reactions to the crowd. At one point he leaned over the balcony rail to get a better view, requiring a gentle correction from his father. The crowd below seemed to appreciate his youthful enthusiasm, with many people laughing and pointing affectionately at the young prince's antics. Even in the midst of formal ceremony, his childhood exuberance reminded everyone that behind the royal titles were real people. A real family. George stood with remarkable composure for his age, aware perhaps more than his younger siblings of the weight of expectation that rested on him. Yet he too was just a child. And occasionally his serious expression would break into a genuine smile, especially when the crowd's cheering reached particularly loud peaks. The young prince had learned to balance his future role with his present childhood, a delicate act that his parents had worked hard to help him navigate. As the family continued to wave and acknowledge the crowd, Charlotte became increasingly aware that the moment she had been waiting for was approaching. The RAF flypast would happen soon, and she wanted to make her gesture before that spectacular display captured everyone's attention. The flypast was always the climax of the balcony appearance, the moment when historical aircraft and modern jets would soar overhead in perfect formation, trailing colored smoke and creating a thrilling finale to the day's events. The young princess shifted slightly, positioning herself so that she could easily reach her mother. She looked up at Catherine once more, seeing the way her mother's gaze swept over the crowd, trying to take in every face, every sign, every expression of support. Charlotte understood that her mother was trying to absorb this moment, to hold it in her memory as a reminder of why the challenges had been worth facing. Why returning to public duty mattered so much? Catherine suddenly looked down at Charlotte. Perhaps sensing her daughter's focused attention, their eyes met, and in that instant, a complete conversation happened without words. Charlotte's expression conveyed love, pride, and a tenderness that seemed remarkable for someone so young. Catherine's face softened even further, her public smile transforming into something more intimate and maternal. Whatever challenges they had faced, whatever difficulties might come in the future, this moment was theirs. Mother and daughter connected by bonds that went far beyond their royal roles. The noise from the crowd shifted slightly, and someone near the balcony shouted a message of love for Catherine that was picked up by others nearby. Soon, a section of the crowd was calling out their support, creating a ripple effect that spread through the gathered masses. The spontaneous display of affection caused Catherine's composure to waver, and for a moment she simply stood there, overwhelmed by the generosity of spirit from so many strangers who somehow didn't feel like strangers at all. William noticed his wife's emotional response and moved slightly closer, his presence a steady anchor as it had been throughout their years together. He understood better than anyone what this moment meant to Catherine, how hard she had worked to be here, how much courage it had taken to step back into the public eye. His pride in her was evident in every protective gesture, every supportive glance. Charlotte watched her father's attention to her mother, and felt her own heart swell with love for her family. She had always been close to both parents, but the recent challenges had shown her aspects of their characters that deepened her admiration. She had seen her mother's bravery and her father's devoted support. She had witnessed how they protected her and her brothers from worry while dealing with their own fears and concerns. The maturity of understanding this gave Charlotte made her gesture even more meaningful. The crowd's energy showed no signs of diminishing. If anything, as word spread through the gathered masses about Catherine's visible emotion, the outpouring of affection intensified. People who had their own experiences with illness felt a personal connection to what the Princess of Wales had endured. Parents who had worried about explaining Catherine's absence to their children were relieved and happy to see her back. Everyone who had followed the story felt invested in this moment of return and recovery. Charlotte took a deep breath, preparing herself for what she was about to do. It wasn't nervousness that made her pause, but rather the significance she attached to the gesture. She wanted it to be perfect, to convey everything she felt for her mother in a way that was both public and deeply personal. The young princess was aware that cameras were capturing every moment, that photographs of this balcony appearance would be studied and shared around the world. But her primary concern wasn't how it would look to others, but how it would feel to her mother. The moment arrived with a gentle naturalness that made it all the more touching. Charlotte, standing beside her mother on the balcony, reached out and took Catherine's hand. It was such a simple gesture, a child holding her mother's hand. Yet in that context and moment, it carried profound meaning. The young princess's small fingers wrapped around her mother's, and she gave a gentle, reassuring squeeze. Catherine looked down immediately, surprised by the tender contact. Royal protocol typically kept such displays of affection private, especially during formal public appearances. But Charlotte had chosen to break that invisible barrier, prioritizing her connection with her mother over concerns about propriety. The princess's face showed pure love and support, a daughter telling her mother without words that she was proud of her, that she was there for her, that they were in this together. The squeeze of Charlotte's hand seemed to say everything that couldn't be spoken aloud in that public moment. It said, "I'm proud of you." It said, "I know how hard this has been." It said, "You're the strongest person I know." It said, "I love you."
Ow.
All of these messages traveled through that simple touch, and Catherine felt every one of them as clearly as if they had been spoken. Tears immediately filled Catherine's eyes, and this time she didn't try to hide them. The gesture from her daughter had broken through the careful composure she had been maintaining. These weren't tears of sadness, but of overwhelming love and gratitude. Her own daughter, at just 9 years old, had understood exactly what she needed in that moment and had been brave enough to provide it. Regardless of the cameras and the crowds and the protocol, Catherine squeezed back, her hand tightening around Charlotte's in acknowledgement and reciprocation. For several seconds, mother and daughter stood there hand in hand, connected in a bubble of intimacy, despite being surrounded by thousands of people. The world around them seemed to fade temporarily as they shared this moment, just the two of them. A mother and her daughter expressing love in its purest form. The photographers captured the moment, their cameras clicking frantically as they recognized they were witnessing something special. Even experienced royal photographers who had documented countless formal events felt a lump in their throats as they watched this tender exchange. This was the kind of genuine human moment that transcended the usual formality of royal coverage, the kind of image that would resonate with people because of its authentic emotion. Those in the crowd, who were close enough to see what was happening, began to react, their own emotions stirred by the touching scene. Word spread quickly through the gathered masses, people turning to each other and gesturing toward the balcony, explaining what they had just witnessed. The crowd's cheering took on a different quality, warmer and more emotional, as people responded to this display of family love. On the balcony, William had noticed the exchange between his wife and daughter. His own eyes glistened with emotion as he watched them. He had always known his daughter was special, remarkably perceptive and emotionally intelligent, but this moment confirmed it beyond any doubt. Charlotte had instinctively known what her mother needed and had given it freely, with a selflessness and maturity that was extraordinary. King Charles, from his position on the balcony, also observed the moment between his granddaughter and daughter-in-law. The king's expression softened, and those who knew him well would have recognized the pride and affection in his eyes. The monarchy's future was clearly in good hands, not just because of titles and succession, but because of the genuine love and support this family showed each other. Charlotte continued to hold her mother's hand, not rushing to let go. She wanted her mother to feel her support for as long as possible. The young princess had learned from Catherine herself the power of small gestures, the way a thoughtful action could mean more than grand statements. Her mother had always been the one to remember birthdays, to send personal notes, to make people feel seen and valued. Now Charlotte was returning that gift, showing her mother that she too was seen and valued. Catherine bent down slightly, bringing herself closer to her daughter's level. With the hand that wasn't holding Charlotte's, she gently touched her daughter's cheek, a gesture of such tenderness that it spoke volumes about their relationship. In that touch was acknowledgement of Charlotte's thoughtfulness, gratitude for her support, and pure maternal love. The Princess of Wales mouthed thank you to her daughter. Knowing Charlotte would understand even without hearing the words, the young princess smiled up at her mother, a smile of such genuine happiness that it seemed to light up her entire face. She had given her mother exactly what she intended to give, a moment of connection and support that would help Catherine through what had to be an emotionally overwhelming day. Charlotte's mission was accomplished, but more than that, she had strengthened the bond between them, adding another precious memory to the collection they shared, as mother and daughter finally released their hands. Both turning back to wave at the crowd, something had shifted. Catherine stood a little taller, her smile now reaching her eyes with unguarded joy. The support of her daughter had reinforced her strength, reminding her of all the reasons she had fought so hard to recover and return to public life. These weren't just abstract duties, but deeply personal connections. Moments with her children that made everything worthwhile. The crowd, those who had seen the exchange and those who had heard about it, responded with even greater enthusiasm. The cheering reached new heights, Celebration not just of royal tradition, but of human connection. It's the love between a mother and daughter that everyone could relate to, regardless of their own circumstances. In that moment, Catherine wasn't just the Princess of Wales, but a mother being supported by her child. And Charlotte wasn't just a princess, but a daughter showing love for her mother. News of the touching moment began, spreading beyond those present at the event. People watching on television had seen it, and social media immediately lit up with discussion of Charlotte's sweet gesture. The images of the princess taking her mother's hand were being shared across platforms, accompanied by emotional reactions from people around the world. The story was resonating because it tapped into universal feelings, the love between parent and child, the support we give those we care about during difficult times. Royal commentators, many of whom had covered the family for years, found themselves genuinely moved by what they had witnessed. These were professionals accustomed to analyzing royal appearances with objectivity. But even they couldn't help but respond to the genuine emotion of the moment. Several admitted on air that they had been brought to tears by Charlotte's gesture, recognizing it as something truly special that transcended their usual coverage. The RAF flypast began moments after Charlotte and Catherine's tender exchange, providing a spectacular finale to an already emotional day. The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder, and everyone on the balcony and in the crowd below turned their eyes skyward. Historic planes flew in formation alongside modern jets, a display that connected past and present in a thrilling aerial performance. The roar of the engines was deafening, and colored smoke trails painted the sky in red, white, and blue. Charlotte stood watching the fly past, but she kept glancing at her mother, checking to make sure Catherine was enjoying the spectacle. The young princess could see that her mother's expression had changed from the overwhelming emotion of minutes before to pure joy and wonder as she watched the aircraft thunder overhead. The gesture of holding hands had given Catherine exactly what she needed, a moment of grounding and connection that allowed her to fully embrace the rest of the experience. As the last of the aircraft disappeared into the distance, their smoke trails slowly dissipating in the breeze, the royal family remained on the balcony for a few more minutes, continuing to wave to the enthusiastic crowd below. The atmosphere was electric with celebration and satisfaction. People who had waited hours for this moment felt rewarded by what they had witnessed. It's not just the traditional ceremony, but the touching human moment between Princess Charlotte and her mother. When the family finally retreated from the balcony, stepping back through the doors into the palace, there was a palpable sense of relief and accomplishment. The event had been a complete success, but more importantly, it had marked Catherine's confident return to public life. Palace staff offered congratulations and refreshments as the family made their way to a private room where they could relax away from public scrutiny. William immediately pulled Catherine into an embrace, holding her close and whispering words meant only for her ears. Charlotte watched her parents with satisfaction, knowing that her gesture had contributed to making this a positive experience for her mother. Prince George, ever the thoughtful older brother, complimented Charlotte on how well she had conducted herself, while Prince Louis, now freed from the constraints of formal behavior, bounced around the room recounting his favorite parts of the ceremony. The king and queen joined them, and the extended family shared refreshments and conversation about the day's events. King Charles specifically mentioned how moving it had been to see Charlotte's gesture, praising his granddaughter for her compassion and thoughtfulness. Charlotte felt herself blush under the praise, but was mostly just happy that everyone recognized how special the moment had been. As news coverage of the event began to air and social media posts multiplied, the impact of Charlotte's gesture became increasingly clear. The images of the young princess taking her mother's hand had struck a chord with people worldwide. News outlets weren't just reporting on the ceremony, but focusing extensively on this touching moment. With headlines celebrating Charlotte's sweet support for her mother, people who had never particularly followed royal news found themselves moved by the photographs and video clips circulating online. Parents saw their own children in Charlotte's protective gesture. People who had faced health challenges themselves connected with Catherine's emotional response to her daughter's support. The moment was resonating across different cultures, ages, and backgrounds because it represented something fundamentally human and universally understood. The love between a mother and daughter. Social media was flooded with emotional responses. People shared their own stories of how their children had supported them during difficult times, creating a massive conversation about the strength families draw from each other. Artists began creating illustrations inspired by the moment. Opinion pieces praised Charlotte's emotional intelligence and the parenting that had nurtured such compassion. The young princess's gesture had sparked something much larger than anyone could have anticipated. Mental health advocates used the moment to discuss the importance of showing vulnerability and accepting support, even in public roles. They praised Catherine for not hiding her emotional response, and Charlotte for offering comfort so openly. The conversation expanded to include discussions about raising emotionally aware children, the value of family support systems, and the human side of public figures. In the days following Trooping the Color, the story continued to develop and spread. International news outlets picked it up, translating the coverage into dozens of languages. The gesture that had lasted only seconds on the Buckingham Palace balcony had become a global talking point, a symbol of compassion that transcended royal protocol and national boundaries. Back at home, the Wales family tried to maintain some normalcy despite the intense media attention. Charlotte found herself praised by teachers at school, congratulated by friends, and approached by people wanting to tell her how much her gesture had meant to them. The young princess handled the attention with grace, but privately, she was most concerned with how her mother was doing. Catherine had been profoundly affected by her daughter's gesture. In quiet conversations with close friends and family, she spoke about how Charlotte's simple act of taking her hand had given her strength at exactly the moment she needed it most. The Princess of Wales had faced one of the most challenging periods of her life with courage and dignity, but knowing she had her daughter's unwavering support made everything feel more manageable. The bond between Catherine and Charlotte, already strong before the health crisis, had deepened into something even more special. They had always enjoyed spending time together, but now there was an added dimension of understanding and mutual support. Charlotte had seen her mother vulnerable and had responded with maturity and compassion. Catherine had felt her daughter's support and knew she could rely on her in ways that went beyond the typical parent-child relationship. Weeks after the event, people were still discussing Charlotte's gesture. It had become one of those rare moments that captured public imagination and refused to fade from memory. Documentaries about the royal family began incorporating footage of the hand-holding as an example of genuine emotion in public life. Photographers who had captured the moment found their images in demand for magazines, books, and exhibitions. For Charlotte herself, the attention gradually died down, allowing her to return to being a normal 9-year-old as much as possible for a member of the royal family. She went back to school, played with her brothers, and enjoyed her hobbies. But she carried with her the knowledge that she had made a difference to her mother when it mattered most. That was worth more than any amount of public praise. Catherine's return to public duties continued successfully, with each appearance reinforcing her recovery and resilience. But she never forgot that moment on the Buckingham Palace balcony when her daughter's small hand had grasped hers, offering comfort and support. It reminded her that while she had a duty to the nation, her most important role would always be as a mother to George, Charlotte, and Louis. The story of Princess Charlotte's sweet gesture became part of royal history, a moment that would be remembered and referenced for years to come. It showed a different side of royal life, one where protocol gave way to genuine human emotion, where a young princess instinctively knew what her mother needed and wasn't afraid to provide it. In the end, what made Charlotte's gesture so powerful was its simplicity. She hadn't made a grand speech or performed an elaborate action. She had simply reached out and taken her mother's hand, letting her know through touch that she wasn't alone, that she was loved, and that she was supported. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest meaning, and on that sunny June day at Trooping the Color, Princess Charlotte proved that truth to the world. The photographs from that day would hang in galleries and appear in history books, but for Catherine and Charlotte, the memory lived in their hearts. It was a reminder of their bond, of the strength they drew from each other, and of the love that defined their relationship beyond any royal titles or public duties. Mother and daughter had shared a moment that moved millions, but most importantly, they had shared a moment that meant everything to each other.